Aubrey Dameron was known in her small town of Grove, Oklahoma, as someone who rooted for the underdog and embraced the outsider. As a member of the Cherokee Nation, a transgender woman, two-spirit person, and a person who suffered from chronic illness, she was no stranger to being the underdog herself. In the early morning hours of March 9th, 2019, 25-year-old Aubrey announced to her family she was leaving home to meet a friend. And that was the last time anyone saw her alive. 6 years later, Aubrey's case is still cold, and her family is still reeling from her death. And her case sits in a box in a basement. Hello, and welcome to Box in the Basement podcast. I'm your host, Arlene.
And I'm Leah.
In the last 50 years, the U.S. has had nearly 1 million homicides, and since then, over 250,000 cases sit in a box in a basement where all hopes for justice go to die. In 1996, someone shot my uncle Leon Laurelis, changing my life forever and leaving a devastating hole in my heart, and his case remains unsolved. Join me and my wife, Leah, as we shed light on these forgotten victims, their life, the loved ones they left behind, the evidence, and the theories of who committed these crimes, leaving communities in fear and leaving families without answers. Support our effort to change the justice system through the Homicide Families Victims' Rights Act, as we hope to make a difference with our audience as we remember the victims and demand justice. In 1996, my world was shattered when my uncle Leon Laurelis was shot execution style in a small town in Texas. To this day, his murder remains unsolved, and the pain of that injustice continues to haunt me, my family, and Leon's friends and coworkers. Here at Box in the Basement, we want to shed light on the overwhelming number of unsolved murders and disappearances here in Texas and beyond. We want to bring awareness to the lesser-known cases that got little to no attention in hopes that someone listening will come forward with any information, because we strongly believe all lives matter. Ultimately, we want to get justice for Leon and for all the victims whose cases are sitting, collecting dust in a box in a basement. Please note that this episode contains depictions of violence that some people may find disturbing. Listener discretion is advised. Please like and follow our pages on all social media platforms for Box in the Basement Podcast and Justice for Leon Laurelis. And now you can also find us on YouTube.
The trade war between the U.S. and China raged on in 2019. The United Kingdom voted to leave the European Union. Protests in Hong Kong, Algeria, Sudan, Chile, Lebanon, Iraq, and Iran made international news. And a white supremacist in New Zealand attacked a mosque live on social media that left 51 people dead. Baby Yoda became a global sensation. Game of Thrones came to an end. A bunch of weirdos promised to storm Area 51 but never did. And Prince Harry and Meghan Markle welcomed baby Archie into the world. The week of March 9th, Shallow by Lady Gaga and Bradley Cooper topped the Billboard Hot 100, and Beautiful Crazy by Luke Combs was #1 on the country charts. How to Train Your Dragon, The Hidden World ruled the box office, and Where the Crawdads Sing by Delia Owens was number one on the New York Times bestseller list. Grove, Oklahoma is a small town in the northeast corner of the state, around 90 miles northeast of Tulsa in Delaware County, which is part of the Cherokee Nation. The town grew up around a trail that connected southwest Missouri to towns in Oklahoma. The railroad eventually moved in, and Grove began to grow. It's on Grand Lake of the Cherokees, which is gorgeous, by the way. It's a popular retirement spot and home to a number of professional fishing tournaments. The population of Grove sat at just under 7,000 residents at the time of Aubrey Dameron's disappearance, but it's important to note that there are always tons of tourists and travelers in the area. In the summer, the population often triples. It's a quaint little town, but it does have its share of issues. It's a resort town, a lake town, so there are tourists with money and bass boats shopping at expensive boutiques. Wages for the locals are low, however, and housing is expensive. Drugs are a problem across economic lines, which is fairly common in rural small towns throughout the U.S.
Aubrey Dameron was born in Oklahoma on October 22, 1993, and was a citizen of the Cherokee Nation of Oklahoma. As we mentioned in the intro, Aubrey was a trans woman, and she started transitioning socially in high school, using female pronouns and her chosen name. She was bullied relentlessly in high school for that reason, but according to her family, it never really bothered her. Instead, Aubrey chose to be a voice for others who were also facing adversity. She was a relentless advocate for the underdog. She was especially close to her uncle Christian, who was more like a brother to her since he was only 6 months older. They relied on each other as teenagers, and when Aubrey realized she was trans and Christian realized he was gay, they leaned into that mutual support and helped each other through the tough times. Aubrey's mother was not accepting of her transition, which made her relationship with Christian and other supportive family members all the more important. Aubrey would later begin to describe herself as Two-Spirit, which is a broad term used by Indigenous communities to describe someone who had both masculine and feminine spirits or energy. Aubrey dreamed of going into show business, either as an actor or a musician. Her family fondly remembers her putting on performances in the house, standing on tables and singing or dancing. Aubrey's family didn't have a lot of money, so her dreams of taking professional classes to help her reach her goals had to be put on hold. Aubrey also suffered from epilepsy and took medication daily to help manage her symptoms. Despite this, Aubrey remained positive, and she never lost her desire to look out for others. No matter how hard things were for her, she'd always put others first, even if all she could do was lend a listening ear. Aubrey graduated from Grove Beauty School in 2015, and things were looking up. Then Aubrey met and started dating a man named Jay. According to her family, this relationship wasn't exactly healthy. But Aubrey stayed and eventually followed Jay to New Mexico, far from her support system. Things started to spiral out of control. Her relationship with Jay fell apart, and she took solace in drugs and alcohol. Aubrey moved back to Oklahoma in August of 2018 and moved in with her mother, stepfather, and brother. Aubrey's uncle Christian mentions in several interviews that he was happy his favorite niece was coming home, but also concerned because her mother, stepfather, and brother all struggled with drug addiction themselves. We mentioned earlier that Aubrey's mother wasn't supportive of her at first, But over the years, they did repair their relationship and seemed to be in a good place by the time she moved back home.
According to her Aunt Pam, Aubrey was a totally different person when she returned from New Mexico. The once confident and outgoing woman was a shell of her former self. Shy, fearful, always looking over her shoulder, afraid her ex Jay would come after her. Pam went so far as to say Aubrey was afraid Jay would kill her. She stayed off social media, which was unusual for her. Previously, she posted something every day. Her family hardly saw her, she didn't call or text anymore, and things started to spiral out of control once again. It's not super clear why, if she was just depressed and scared and keeping a low profile, or if she'd fallen back into addiction. Things kind of came to a boil in early 2019 when Aubrey and her stepdad got into a fight that turned physical, which led to Aubrey catching a charge for assault and battery. Those charges would eventually be dropped right before she disappeared. At around 3:30 a.m. on March 9th, 2019, Aubrey, dressed in all black, walked into the living room and told her family she was leaving to meet a friend. It's not clear to me who all was in the living room, but her brother was there for sure. Aubrey's mother, Jennifer, woke up at this time and said goodbye. At first, nobody thought much of this. I'm assuming it wasn't too odd for anyone in the family to keep odd hours, given that multiple people in the household were up at the time Aubrey left. There was nothing suspicious about it at the time, in any case. The family became concerned pretty quickly, however, when Aubrey never returned. Like we mentioned before, Aubrey was on medication for epilepsy and she'd left it at home in her purse. At first, because these items were left behind, her family assumed that she wouldn't be gone long, which is why they became worried fairly quickly.
Aubrey's family filed a missing persons report on March 11th after after being unable to make contact with her for 2 days. Aubrey's family lived in a rural area, so there was nowhere that Aubrey could have feasibly walked to if she was planning on doing so to meet up with that friend in the early hours of March 9th, unless she was meeting someone at a nearby house. Overhead imagery shows that Aubrey's house is at the end of a rural road and it's set in a stand of trees. There are some other buildings and residences down the main road that heads southwest from her house, and then a small trailer park separated Aubrey's house by a large open field directly to the south. If she was truly leaving to meet someone, she would have either met that person somewhere nearby or out in the open in a nearby residence, or she would have gotten a ride from someone. Despite the family's concern, it took time for local law enforcement to take Aubrey's disappearance seriously. If you listened to our series on missing, murdered, and Indigenous women a few months back, you know that this is not unusual. Despite the fact that Indigenous women are much more likely to be victims of violent crimes than women of other backgrounds. Trans women are also much more likely to be victims of violent crime. But unfortunately, that can also bring out the worst in people, including those in law enforcement. Violent crimes against trans women are also less likely to be solved. There are a host of reasons for that, which we'll discuss more in depth later on. But prejudice is among them, whether or not we want to admit it. Aubrey's Aunt Pam recalled that when the family first talked to the police, the officer handling her case didn't believe that she was a missing person at all. He blamed her, quote unquote, lifestyle and claimed that she was, quote, very sexually active. There's no indication that this assumption is based in reality or if he was just being dismissive. Yes, Aubrey did have a history of drug use, but that doesn't mean she isn't a missing person or a victim of violent crime.
I remember very recently stories about the hairstylist from Colorado who went missing. Jax Grattan, I think is her name. She's a trans woman as well. The comments on the stories on social media are appalling. People are hateful assholes. And don't come at me with this, we don't hate them, we just don't agree with them crap. There is plenty of hate for the trans community, and it's stupid and disgusting. Anyway, back to our story.
On March 12th, Aubrey's ex boyfriend Jay got a phone call from a woman who called herself Danette and claimed that she had knowledge that Aubrey was kidnapped because she owed money to a drug dealer. This Danette also said that if the debt is paid in full, Aubrey would be released. But if it isn't paid, they'll kill Aubrey. Jay called the police and they interviewed Danette, who admitted it was all a hoax and she had no idea where Aubrey was. Danette was charged with extortion, and the family's hopes were crushed once again. Pam and a small group of volunteers performed an extensive search of the property near Aubrey's house. They found a sock with possible blood on it about a half-mile from the home. Tests on the sock came back inconclusive for blood, however, and investigators went back to square one. Cell phone records indicated that Aubrey's phone last pinged around 100 yards from her family's home at 3:42 a.m. on March 9th, so only about 12 minutes after she left home. The phone was then turned off or the battery died. Interestingly, the place where her phone last pinged was right outside that trailer park we mentioned earlier. According to Christian, investigators did check with the residents along that main road who had security cameras or doorbell cameras, but none of them picked up Aubrey that morning. So it seems that she left her house and then possibly walked across the field towards the trailer park. There were several unconfirmed sightings of Aubrey in Oklahoma and Missouri after she went missing, but nothing came of any of those reports. Aubrey's uncle Christian visited her family's home after learning she was missing, and he found all of Aubrey's belongings boxed up in her room like she was moving out. At that point, Aubrey had only been missing about a week, and Christian found this odd. Her mother claimed that Aubrey had been searching for a bottle of nail polish shortly before she went missing, and that's why everything was packed up. This made no sense to Christian, but he had nothing but a gut feeling to go on. On April 6th, about a month after Aubrey went missing, Aunt Pam learned that ex-boyfriend Jay had allegedly told Aubrey's mother that he killed her. Investigators took this tip seriously and investigated Jay, but couldn't find any evidence he was connected to her disappearance, and his alibi checked out. He was apparently in Colorado at the time Aubrey went missing. Aubrey's mother also denied having that conversation with Jay at all.
Investigators conducted another thorough ground search in the early summer of 2019, where they found a leather jacket matching the description of the one Aubrey was wearing the night she left. The jacket was in a shallow grave near Kenwood, around 30 miles south of Grove, but forensic testing could not determine if the jacket actually belonged to Aubrey or if it was just a coincidence. The bones found in the shallow grave alongside the coat turned out to be animal bones. At this point, Aubrey's family began to lose hope that she was alive somewhere. Her social media profiles had remained untouched since the day she left, her phone was off, and nobody had heard from or seen her. In November of 2019, investigators returned to Aubrey's family's property with search dogs and focused on the area of the property where she was last seen, near a pond. The dogs hit on a tarp inside a shed near this pond, and the tarp had stains on it that appeared to be blood. The dogs hit on several more areas around the pond, and it was partially drained, but investigators found nothing of note. The tarp was eventually sent to a forensic lab for testing, but those results once again came back inconclusive.
After this, the tips and leads stopped coming in, and the investigation ground to a halt. Aubrey's aunt and uncle have been outspoken in their desire to get answers, and they're primarily responsible for keeping Aubrey's story in the eyes of the public. The Cherokee Nation funded billboards along the highways near Tulsa with a tip line listed. In July of 2020, the Supreme Court issued a ruling that meant crimes committed on reservations would be the jurisdiction of the FBI and tribal police. So Aubrey's case is being handled by the Cherokee Nation Marshal Service rather than local law enforcement. This is important because the Marshal Service actually has more resources and personnel, and they have training and experience dealing with cases involving indigenous populations. Aubrey's family also joined forces with other families in the state to get a bill passed that would be like an Amber Alert for adults. And this particular bill has specific guidelines for missing indigenous people. The bill was originally called Aubrey Alert, but lawmakers refused to back a bill named for a trans person. So it became Casey Alert, named for Casey Russell, an Indigenous man who went missing in 2016. Then, on January 31st, 2025, nearly 6 years after Aubrey went missing, the Quapaw Nation Marshal Service received a call regarding human remains found in a rural section of Ottawa County near Pitcher, Oklahoma, about 40 miles north of Grove. Pitcher is a ghost town. It's a former mining town with a population of less than 20 people. Just a few days later, on February 5th, the Marshal Service announced that the remains had been tested against DNA and that they belong to Aubrey Dameron.
So, what happened to Aubrey in the early morning hours of March 9th, 2019? I think there are several possible scenarios here. First off, I think it's possible she really was just going to meet up with somebody nearby and wasn't intending to be gone long. As we mentioned before, she left behind her purse and her medication, so that alone tells me she wasn't planning on staying out long. Why she left, I don't know. It's possible that she was slipping back into old habits and was meeting up with a plug, and she met with foul play instead. Perhaps she had a date. She was going to meet up with someone for a drink or for sex or just to hang out. The one thing that kind of muddies the situation here is that the house was off the beaten path and not within walking distance of anything except a few other houses. And as far as I know, Aubrey did not have access to a vehicle. So if Aubrey was planning on meeting up with someone for whatever reason, that person would probably be in a car or located close nearby. And it was 3:30 in the morning after all. Cell phone data showed that Aubrey's cell phone pinged around 100 yards from the house, so we know she did leave on foot, but there's no indication as to what happened to her after that final ping 12 minutes after she left. The fact that her phone was either turned off or went dead right after this is suspicious to me. I think whatever happened to her happened close to her family's home.
I agree with that. She was either attacked there or kidnapped from there. Her family tends to think it was a hate crime. And as someone who is both Cherokee and transgender, the odds are shockingly high that this might in fact be the case. It could be that someone targeted her for either reason or both and convinced her to leave her house. Someone pretending to be a friend or a drug dealer or someone interested in a hookup lured her out and then attacked her. So, a bit of a combination of both theories. She was clearly leaving on her own volition to go meet up with someone. She wasn't planning to be gone long, and then she met up with a bad actor. This kind of thing happens to trans women everywhere. Big cities, small towns, and everything in between.
So, what about someone closer to her? Do we think this could have been perpetrated by someone in her family or someone else in her circle?
I've had that thought as well. Early on, Pam told police she heard that Jay, Aubrey's ex boyfriend, was involved, but he seems to have been ruled out and wasn't in the state when Aubrey disappeared. Still, Jay was known to be abusive towards Aubrey, and Pam said that Aubrey was afraid of him and had even threatened to kill her if she left him. So, I don't know. I read another article that brought up the tension between Aubrey and the family members she was living with, specifically her stepfather, with whom she had a serious altercation shortly before her disappearance that resulted in Aubrey being charged with assault and battery. Aubrey had had a strained relationship with her mother previously, and while those issues seemed to be better, things clearly weren't great at home. As we also mentioned, the family's members in the home had drug addiction issues. So, in my mind anyway, I don't think it's out of the question to wonder if her family was involved in some way, or no more than they've let on. Aubrey's Aunt Pam is on record saying she is now estranged from her sister, who is Aubrey's mother. So there's definitely some bad blood and distrust there. But that's where we are today. Pam and Christian are still pushing for justice, and podcasts and media outlets are doing their best to keep Aubrey's story in the public eye, especially as trans individuals in the United States face an uncertain and sometimes daunting future.
Some of my fellow podcasters and I have found it increasingly difficult over the past 6 months or so to find information on transgender victims, especially those under 18. Many databases have been scrubbed of information on missing trans kids and teens, for instance, and one case of a murdered trans woman in Texas I had planned to cover this Pride Month has seemingly been erased from existence. All the links I'd saved previously are now broken or simply don't exist anymore. Earlier in the episode, we brought up the fact that trans people, particularly trans women of color, are more likely to be victims of violent crimes than their cisgender counterparts. The main reason for this is quite simple: prejudice. Trans people are a marginalized community, and with that comes a good deal of social stigma, discrimination, and bullying. Trans people are also more likely to experience homelessness and poverty, which leaves them more vulnerable to crime and exploitation. On the flip side, all that translates to lower clearance rates for violent crime cases carried out against trans people. Though it's improved over the last decade, historically, trans people tended not to report violent crimes as often as cis people, in part because of attitudes in law enforcement and the general public. Like I mentioned before, just go read the comments section on any article about a trans person doing anything, really. The absolute worst examples of humanity crawl out of the woodwork to say horrible things. I mean, I'm not trans, I'm just gay, and I've gotten death threats on social media. People are disgusting. We all deserve what we get. We should all be eliminated. We should all be institutionalized or jailed. We're all predators, blah, blah, blah. It gets super old. Because of that stigma and prejudice, a lot of law enforcement entities don't have the experience and or training to handle trans victims either. Law enforcement may refuse to use a trans person's Law enforcement may refuse to use a trans person's chosen name or misgender them, and this can be intentional or unintentional. Like I said, some people just don't know how to deal with a trans victim, so stuff like that happens. This is especially important when dealing with a missing person. All the missing persons posters I've seen for Aubrey used her current chosen name and identified her as a woman, but that's not always the case. If you have a missing person poster with someone's dead name and the gender they were assigned at birth, but that person looks and dresses totally differently now and has maybe even taken hormone therapy or had surgery, then those missing person posters aren't going to do much good. We still have some catching up to do as a society when it comes to trans people in all aspects. And unfortunately, we seem to be going mostly backwards, at least for now. So I fear for my trans friends' safety, to be honest. I fear these problems I've mentioned will only get worse. Only now they'll just get swept under the rug like the old days. It's frustrating.
Since this is Pride Month and things are going the way they're going, we put some resources in the show notes for LGBTQ plus folks and allies who may be struggling or just need a bit of support. As always, we thank you for listening and sharing a little bit of your week with us. Views and opinions expressed in this podcast are solely those of the podcast creators, host, and guest. If you or someone you know is a victim of crime, support is available. Call 855-4-VICTIM to speak with someone who can help you understand your rights and options. Visit victimconnect.org to learn more. We are excited to announce that we are now a part of the Darkcast Network. Darkcast Network, the best in indie podcasts. Check out all the great shows at darkcastnetwork.com.
Hello, is this thing on? Okay, good. I am sorry to interrupt your listening pleasure, but my name is Tiffany, and I'm here to tell you about my podcast, True Crime Connections. It's an advocacy podcast that talks with real survivors about real shit. This is the place you want to be if you've been in a toxic relationship or anything tragic has happened to you and you're looking to find your strength and healing. No two episodes are alike, but they all give you useful tools that you can take with you. So make sure to find me on your favorite podcast platform, or you can go to truecrimeconnections.com and come join the hope building community. See you there.
If you think bringing unsolved cases is important, then please take a moment to rate and review our podcast. Also, please like and follow our pages on all social media platforms for Box in the Basement podcasts and Justice for Leon Laurelis. You can now also find us on YouTube. If you like what you hear, please do us a favor and subscribe. It would help so much, my lovelies. Also, please share this episode so we can bring awareness to these lesser-known cases so we can reach more people in hopes that someone who may know something will come forward. I'd also like to ask that you sign my petition for my Uncle Leon Laurelis' case to be reopened and reviewed with fresh eyes. And you can find our petition on change.org. Thank you for joining us. Be kind. Later, Gators.